Hi there, friends. It's Ashley with my homeschool brain, where you get to pick out the juicy tidbits from up here and do what you want to with them. Today's homeschool topic is dyslexia. I totally nerd out when it comes to dyslexia. I'm very passionate about this topic. I have 3 children, and all of them have different levels of dyslexia. So it's been a nice little learning curve for me over the years, and like I said, I kind of nerd out. So I've got some notes here on my iPad that I'm going to try to kind of keep this in a very funneled, systematic layout so I don't ramble too much. So here are the talking points for today. The definition of dyslexia, the levels of dyslexia, the different areas of dyslexia, and how it relates to homeschool. The definition of dyslexia is defined as a general term for disorders that involve difficulty learning to read, to interpret words, letters, and other symbols, but do not have any effect on intelligence. Why is it important for the definition of this word to include that last phrase? Does not have any bearance upon intelligence, because it doesn't. Zero correlation between struggling to read and how intelligent you are, what your IQ test would look like. If you are a mom or a dad or a grandparent that has recently discovered that your child or grandchild is dyslexic, always know, just put this in your brain right now, that it has nothing to do with how smart they are. It just means that they struggle with the written language, and that's it. Okay, so to move on to our next talking point are the levels of dyslexia. There are 4 main levels of dyslexia. There's a stealth dyslexic, which is your child who looks like they would just try a little harder, they wouldn't struggle, or they're just not putting in the effort, when in fact their brains are actually working double time to try to process whatever information they have in front of them. And while they can read the word, it just takes them longer to read the word. So their processing time is often delayed. So from an outside point of view, man, if you would just read that word faster, but they can't. So just give them some grace. My oldest is a stealth, and it's been a crazy little roller coaster ride. Knowing that he could read not only on grade level, but above grade level, and correlating that with mediocre grades and the inability to write letters correctly, it was bizarre. So he is a stealth dyslexic, and now that we know that, we understand how his brain works a little bit better, and provided him all the tools that he needs to re-enter public school by his choice, and he's thriving. He's doing great. His grades are significantly improved. He knows areas that he struggles with, and he's doing amazing. My middle one is a mild dyslexic, and so for him, it's letter reversal. It is attempting to read in the earlier years from the wrong side of the page out, going in, and just general, can't find my word. What's that called? Oh, I know that object, but I can't think of its name right now. You know, that thing. We have a lot of that in my house with my mild. He has a hard time pulling information out. He knows it's what it is. It's in his brain, but his proverbial Rolodex is just not spinning very fast. Maybe it needs some WD-40, I don't know. My daughter is a severe dyslexic, and so she not only doesn't read on grade level, she doesn't write well, she knows her basic sounds, but she doesn't know all of her sounds easily. And learning those sounds and not confusing your vowels, you know, A's versus I's versus E's, it's really a struggle for her to do what we would call very basic reading. But that's okay, because we're working on it, and we will get there. We will find that breaking point where it all comes together and everything is just processing really well and all of her neurotransmitters are dinging back and forth like a ping pong game, it's going to happen. It's just going to take significantly longer than it took for my middle one or for my oldest one to get on the same level, and that's just fine. There is also a profound dyslexic, which is obviously just what it sounds, much more severe than the other three, level 4, if you will. And they need maybe deeper and longer intervention, but again, they can all learn to read. It's just gonna be different on the timing. So for me, having 3 dyslexic kids, one of the things that I really struggle with is why. Why does society tell us that all 3rd graders should be reading at this level by this age, and all 7th graders should be reading at this level by this age, when in fact, all of our brains learn differently? Even if you're a non-dyslexic, your brain still learns differently than, Stevie next door's. So why does it that they expect everybody to be on the same level all the time? And it blows my mind, and I'm still learning how to kind of deal with that. It's a trigger for me, if you can't tell. Moving on. There are different areas of dyslexia. It's not a one-size-fits-all. What my oldest one can do, my middle one can't. What my baby girl can do, maybe my older one can't. Okay, so let's break those down a little bit. Phonological, surface or visual, rapid naming, numerical, and directional. I am 2, personally, me. I am numerically dyslexic and directionally dyslexic. So give me the written word, I got that. I got my sounds, I can read well, I love reading, but you put some numbers in front of me, friend, let me tell you. I took an accounting class when I was 18 or 19 years old, and I did amazing on all of the daily work. But then they would give us a test, of course, in college, and it would be this whole sheet of add this, take away this, add this, take away this, until you get the correct answer. So what would happen to me is, like on line 3, I would transpose $356 with $536. And then of course, as you keep moving on that wrong transpose number, my answer was always off. I failed that class miserably and decided that accounting is not for me. Good to know. I'm also directionally dyslexic, which my compass is broken. My internal compass tells me that it doesn't matter what direction I'm facing, I'm always facing north. People can look outside and go, okay, that's east. That's left or right, period. I do not do well with directions. I can be looking at the sun, and logically, I know what direction that is. But my internal compass says, you're going north. Doesn't matter, period. I'm always facing north. So there's just different things. Phonological is just what it sounds. It's the sounds that the individual letters or groups of letters make that produce our words that we use. Surface or visual means that the squiggly letters on the line don't make sense. I can't convert that squiggly letter or those weird lines on that page to an audible sound. It rarely has anything to do with your vision. It's not that you don't see them or that they're blurry or any of this such. It just can't convert those lines into an audible sound. Rapid naming, that's my middle one. Man, he just can't find his words. He knows that this is an iPad. It's logical, that's what this is. But when he's like, hey mom, can I use your, what's it called? iPad, can I use your iPad? When I talk to him about his dyslexia and the fact that he can't recall things, I tell him that he has this Rolodex, and of course I explained what a Rolodex is. and that normally your brain flips through your Rolodex and pulls out all the words it needs to prepare and say this sentence. But his Rolodex gets stuck. It gets like squeaky is what I make jokes, or that it needs WD-40 because it's just not turning fast enough to pull out all the words that he needs. He knows the words, he just can't bring them to the front of his brain as easily as other kids can. We've already discussed the numerical and the directional, and so your child can have one or all of these. My child who can't remember what words to use is amazing at directions. We are currently in Tennessee, and when we hit the Oklahoma line, he can tell you exactly how to get to his grandma's house. When we hit that Missouri line, he kind of knows. He can almost guide you to grandma's, especially when we get into town. He's like, oh, you need to turn left up here, Mom. Like that he gets. But remembering that this is an iPad, sometimes he can't remember what this iPad's called. So there are your areas. And just because you have one doesn't guarantee you're going to have the others, but you can have multiple. So how does this relate to homeschooling? The fun part for me, because now I can just spit it all out there. It was dyslexia that guided our family into homeschooling in the beginning, because I knew that my oldest had some kind of a problem. I wasn't sure what it was. I didn't know if it was just a super crazy high IQ, or if it was that he had ADHD and just couldn't do some of the things that he needed to do. But he was very gifted in many areas and extremely lacking or almost none in others. And so that kind of guided our path. And he was in second grade when a new coworker, her and I were talking about some of his struggles, and he is actually sitting in the office with me at the time. And he was sitting at my desk and he was drawing or coloring or whatever. And she pulls him aside and she's like, hey, do you see the way he's holding his pencil? I'm like, yeah. So, do you see how long it's taken him to read? I'm like, yeah. Obviously. Can he tie his shoes? I'm like, no. Ashley, his struggles are not anything that you think that they are. He's dyslexic. Oh, okay, what's that? I had no idea. I mean, I knew that I had dyslexia, but I thought it was only numbers. Like, I just was not knowledgeable at all. So that sent me on this many, many year and continues now tailwind of educating myself and learning new things about dyslexia. Cue the rambling. So, with that said, I knew what Kevin looked like as a dyslexic. So by the time my middle one came around to learning all the normal things, and he was in kindergarten actually 2 years earlier than my oldest was, I was seeing signs. Okay, well here's, check, check, check. But I wasn't ready to physically and verbally say number 2 is dyslexic as well, because I was worried that at some point I was transposing my oldest's learning curve onto this one, onto the second one, my middle ones, without having this logical thing. Like, you know, just because one has it, you just assume that the other 2 are not, or you're going to assume that they all have it. And I didn't want to put that on my middle one. But by the middle of kindergarten, see, I do it too. So we're learning sight words, but we're not learning sight words. He does not do sight words at all. It was a very traumatic thing for him in public school, having to memorize 100 words that he literally couldn't recognize. They were all just a bunch of squiggly lines on paper. So I taught him to sound out his words. I was teaching him phonics at home. So he'd go to school to do his test, and he would sit there and sound out his word. There. And they would say, oh, I'm sorry, you tried to sound that out even though you read the word correctly, you don't get credit because you didn't just spit it out. So then I had to teach my 5-year-old to cheat the system and to sound out his words without moving his lips. And only move his lips once he has sounded out in his head first. That way he could pass his test and get his picture taken and put on the bulletin board with everybody else in his class. Of all the kids in his class, he was the next to last to get his picture taken of rah, look at you, you can read, which really sets me into a different tailwind because that makes me mad for a whole bunch of reasons. Never should they have ever put a reward behind doing something like reading in a public manner, because it wasn't just his class that got to see that. It was every single kid that walked that school. Oh, there's 30 kids in your class, but there's only 25 up there with their picture taken. And anyway, again, tailwind, redirect here. And then my daughter come along and we homeschooled her. She attended a public preschool, but she was at home at kindergarten and most of first grade until we moved to a different state that had an amazing dyslexia program. And so we opted to try that. But up until that point, it was very obvious to me that she was also dyslexic. But again, I just wasn't ready to have 3 dyslexic kids with 3 different learning styles. And I just wasn't ready for it. But by the time we put her in the public school in first grade, almost to the end of first grade, she wasn't in class but a couple weeks, and I'm seeing papers come home that obviously were, the teacher was circling letter reversals and things like that. Molly was writing her name physically backwards, and there was just a bunch of stuff. So I asked for a parent-teacher conference, and I go in and I'm prepared to fight the system in a sense, like I'd had to do with both of the boys through their academic careers in public school. And I sit down at this table with this amazing woman and, hi, how are you? Glad you're here. She says, do you have a family history of dyslexia? And of course, now I'm caught off guard a little bit because I expected to have to say that to her, And so then I'm inquisitive. I'm like, oh, why do you think she's dyslexic? What gives you that idea? And she listed all these things that Molly doesn't do the way other children do. And I had my notebook because I'm an avid note taker. And so I turned it around and I said, look, you just listed every single one of my concerns. And I cried right there. I was so overwhelmed. For the first time in my children's lives, there was a teacher who recognized dyslexia and was knowledgeable about it and was willing to do what it took to help my daughter. Oh my gosh, I'm still in love with that lady. She's still my favorite. But that was a big moment for me because then I got home, and while I'm completely elated that this teacher saw this, that also meant that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't transposing my older boys' learning curves onto my daughter. There really was a valid reason to my back of my brain thinking that, oh, I've got 3 dyslexic kids. So that's my long, crazy story and kind of how our journey has progressed. So with that said, our homeschooling is back in full force. The 2 little ones are home. And how does that look? How did that look with my oldest? And how does that look for my 2 littles now? My oldest is the stealth dyslexic. And so everything just takes longer. He reads perfectly fine. He actually reads significantly better in his head than he does out loud, because that connection between seeing a word in writing, converting it to an audible sound, recognizing that word, and then being able to spit it out and repeat that word with a voiced action, it gets lost. I mean, it just really gets lost in there. And so if I ask him to read out loud, he doesn't remember anything that he read. He has zero comprehension skills for that, but he can immediately read that passage in his own head, and he's got it. There's no comprehension problems at all. So learning that about him was key to his education and to preparing him to get him into the public school system, which is what he wanted, to get him all the tools that he needs. That was the first step, is to know, okay, if you're asked to read out loud in class, kiddo, you've got to reread that passage later tonight or after you're done reading, because you're not going to remember what you just read. So knowing that about him. With my middle one, it is knowing that memorization doesn't work. He doesn't memorize words. He doesn't see, they teach that whole language learning, I think is what it's called, where, the shape of the letter will give you an indication of what word it would be. None of that. It doesn't make sense at all. It just doesn't compute at all. And so everything he does is slower because he actually has to sound out each word. And he's getting faster and faster and faster at that, but especially in the earlier years, knowing that his reading is going to take a long time, it was more important for me to help him with the sounds of the letters and the groups of letters to form these words than it was for him to read on grade level. I needed him to get from a logical point A, here are your sounds of your consonants, here are your sounds of your vowels, and all of the sounds of the vowels, to get him to logically progress to the different rules of spelling and that sort of thing. So that's a different learning path than the older one. Now with my sweet little daughter, who is a severe dyslexic, nothing makes sense. The only thing that works for her is constant repetition. Example, we were learning some sight words in preschool. The words is and the, and an A and an, your very basics. There was just like 10, I think, that the teacher kind of introduced over the year. So she started learning the word the in preschool, so age 4. We worked on the word the all through kindergarten, all through first grade, and it wasn't until a little towards the middle of second grade where she could see that word and read it instantly. That's how long it took her to memorize or to recognize the word the. Process that a minute. I mean, you and I and most little children on words that they've been introduced to, I don't know, 20 hours worth over a course of a year, can read the word the and is pretty instantly. It took her 2.5 years. So for her, is not really spitting and out the information and cramming a bunch of stuff into there. We're very foundational. So everything we do for her is not on grade level. She is technically a 3rd grader, if you have to give her a grade, but she still does 1st grade phonics and grammar and 2nd grade math. Why? Because she struggles with her learning. And so instead of forcing a progression for her to be confused by, we just work as she learns, and we add as she learns, and just keep repeating the same concepts as many times as we need to until that concept is solidified. Now, I will tell you, because she is now 8, the time it takes to memorize something is lessening over the years. It's getting closer and closer where she's picking up more and more, but it's been a long process. And so her learning style is so much different than my oldest or my middle, but my teaching style also is different for her than it is for the 2 older boys. So when you have a dyslexic child and you are trying to navigate the world of homeschooling, the first thing I would tell you to do is to figure out the different area of dyslexia that your child really struggles with. Now, you can go to a neurological psychologist and have a test done to get a very detailed, but that's very expensive. You can also just do some research on Google. There's a lot of information out there that define the different areas probably significantly better than what I do. And so it's just important that you know, if you know that they are numerically dyslexic, great. That means phonologically they're fine, they can move on. But maybe they're phonologically and rapid naming. You can be both, or maybe they're kind of all of them, like my daughter, or maybe it's definitely all of them, and it's just a very intense learning curve, so maybe they're profound. And then from there, you can really cater and tweak any individual subject to fit the need of that child. The second thing I'll tell you to do is to know your child's learning style. So my oldest is an auditory learner. Man, don't ask him to read that. He is not going to retain it as well. He's going to forget it by tomorrow, like we all do. But you have a good discussion with him, or he watches it on TV. He listens to it on a podcast or an audiobook. Man, he could talk about that thing 6 months later, a year later, 5 years later, because he remembers it that way. My middle one is not that way. He is a pen and paper guy. While he does read, and he does read on grade level, barely, it's just significantly longer for him to read in time-wise. He likes worksheets. He likes to do workbooks and to read things and to be just him and learning something in front of him, me in my little bubble, and don't mess with me. Let me do all my learning on my own. My daughter, on the other hand, is kinesthetic. So it's not enough for her to see a letter or a word and just say it. She wants to build it. So we get the Play-Doh out and make the T, make the H, make the E. We manipulate it with different colors, avenues of writing. So it's stamping it, it's tracing it, it's drawing it, whatever. She has to manipulate it, which is awesome. And it's super fun, and it makes our day super fun because we're always doing something different. But it's just more hands-on. And so not only do I have to look at the individual dyslexia needs, but also how they learn. That's very important too. So if you have a kinesthetic and you're trying to do worksheets with them, it's going to be like pulling teeth every time. And they're going to have to do worksheets. They're going to have to do writing. They're going to have to do things that they don't want to do or that doesn't quite fit their learning style as well. But for every subject or topic that you can cater to their learning style, it really helps with solidifying that information and like stamping it on the brain, or it just makes it so much better. So how do you take a subject, let's just say history, and cater it to each of those children, okay? For my oldest, who's the auditory learner, that might be YouTube videos. It might be listening to an audiobook or a podcast, or just having a conversation and kind of drilling in those dates and those facts and the sequence of events. And then he's got it now. He's got it in his brain. My middle one, hand him some worksheets with some, fill in the blanks and circle yes or no's, or multiple choice or whatever. And let him just kind of read as he can, when he can, for as long as he can, and then take a break. And then we're going to work on it again tomorrow, all by myself, just kind of in my own little zone. And for my daughter, we need to act it out. We need to create the environment, and I don't mean like put on a big play, but maybe you do put on a play. Maybe you find something that you can turn into a play and act out that history. A couple years ago, Kevin was learning the American Revolution, and we came across this really awesome book called George Washington and His Spies, maybe. And the whole book is full of all the different methods that the spies used to relay information. And so it's literally doing some of those, using the mirrors or the peed coat hanging outside, all those different things. Let's act it out. because the more she does with it physically, the more she remembers it. And so history doesn't have to be taught in a traditional all-in-one curriculum or school-at-home curriculum mentality. It can literally just be play, and she'll remember it, or at least for my daughter, a whole lot better than she ever would if we wrote it down. The other subject area that is super beneficial to knowing those couple things about your kids, the dyslexia area and the learning style, is science. So instead of handing your kids a workbook if they don't like workbooks, do a project instead. Do project-based learning or STEM learning. But for the kid who's like my middle one, hand him the workbook. Let him go sit there and read it and answer the questions and do what makes him happy and where he's comfortable learning. But do the projects with the one that needs the kinesthetic, the hands-on stuff. And the one that is an auditory learner, again, wrap the entire subject around conversations or listening or videos. So catering those things to how your dyslexic works, your dyslexic's mind works, is key to seeing progress over perfection. Even in math, I know this gets significantly harder the higher grade you get. But for my daughter, she needs the math counters. She needs the boogie board, which is that LED writing board that you click away, like a etch and sketch on steroids. It's really awesome for her because she likes the colors and she can manipulate it, teaching her touch points as opposed to expecting her to memorize math facts. But I will tell you, for my mild dyslexic, math is no problem for him. He soars high above and beyond the other two when it comes to the ease of math functions. So even taking math at these younger levels, especially, make them hands-on. Instead of doing a math worksheet, set up a shop in your house with those little kid cash registers with the calculator on it and let them do math that way. Make it as catered to the learning style as you can. And that means that you might have to think outside of the box. That means that curriculum you just bought that's not working may stay on your shelf or never get used, and that's okay. I mean, financially it's terrible because, we so thought this was gonna be awesome, but it didn't, or it wasn't, and maybe it doesn't work for kid 1, but maybe by kid 2 or 3, it'll be perfectly fine. So taking the time to learn each child and what their needs are is going to be key. And don't worry about grade level. Again, I'm going to go on that rant again. Grade level does not make any difference right now. Until you are in 9th grade where, your transcript matters, there's no need to worry about grade level just yet. Because just from last November to now, we're almost a complete year from when I pulled them back out of public school. Molly has made massive leaps and bounds in her reading and her ability to process the written word. She went from leaving public school in 2nd grade, reading at a kindergarten level still, to homeschooling and focusing on the way she learns, to now, and she's now reading barely at, but still at grade level, which is amazing. Like, kudos to her. She's put in the work. I've put in the work. We're a great team because I teach her how she learns, as opposed to handing her a bunch of worksheets and saying, okay, read it and do yourself, and then being irritated with her because she's a space cadet and she's looking up at the cobwebs because she can't read. Anyway, it's a whole thing. Again, rant over, redirect. So just investing a little bit of time to figuring your children out will pay off in folds, I promise. Now, I know this video is crazy long, and I'm really sorry for that, but it's a very important topic for a lot of families, especially in mine. But I want to quickly discuss what I call dyslexia's siblings. And it's just a family fun way of making These learning curves I'm fixing to mention all kind of come together as a family, but just like any family, they're all individuals and they all stand alone, but yet they all are sometimes intertwined with each other. So we have dyslexia, which I've been discussing and most people are aware of. Let's talk about the next couple that are maybe lesser known or really don't, maybe you've heard the word but don't know what it means. And so dyslexia siblings are dysgraphia, dyscalculia, dyspraxia, and ADHD. Obviously, most people know what ADHD is, but somewhere I read that children who are dyslexic, I think it was Susan Barton said this, and she's the Barton Reading Program, amazing. I'm pretty sure it was her, but she says that if you are dyslexic, you have a 50% chance higher of also having ADHD. So having one does not guarantee you have the other, but 50% of the time, if you have dyslexia, you also have ADHD. So that's why I've included those into, and not just me, but lots of people, into this family of learning curves. So what is dysgraphia? Dysgraphia is the handwriting portion of the written language. It is lines, it is spaces, it is what we would call reasonable sentence formation or word formation or letter formation. It is more than just turning your letters around like dyslexia. Instead, it might be, if we're writing the word the, it'll be a lowercase t with a gigantic capital H with this sideways kind of an E that almost looks like a cursive I kind of a thing. It may be that they write all of their words with no spaces and no punctuation. With both dyslexia and dysgraphia, spelling is always going to be a challenge. And punctuation, capitalization, all those things are going to constantly be a challenge, and they may not ever fully put everything together the way a non-dyslexic would. And that's fine. Dyscalculia is the math portion or the math section of dyslexia. So you can not be dyslexic, but have numerical dyslexia kind of amped up maybe, and that would be your dyscalculia. And so it's not really that logically I don't understand that 1 + 1 is 2, because, you know, even a person with dysgraphia or dyslexia or dyscalculia, like they know that. But why does it happen that way? Why is it that this series of numbers all put together isn't just addition? Why is there multiplication? How does that work? Where's those logical brain click points that correlate skip counting with multiplication or division? And then as they get a little older, you know, algebra, oh my gosh, algebra, why are they putting letters in the middle of numbers? Those foundational math whys, functions of math. So finally we have the last little sibling in the group is dyspraxia. And dyspraxia is coordination, hand-eye coordination, or learning to walk may be a problem when they're little, or learning to crawl, or how they hold their pencil, and it's just lack of coordination in a sense. Like that's basically what its fundamental function is in this. So as you look at all of these siblings as a whole, and assuming that you were to have all of these, which some people might, you know, it's a struggle to read, struggle to write, struggle doing math, struggle with coordination, and inability to pay attention. So I call them siblings because, as you can see, all of those things are neurological in origin, and they can be kind of mixed up. You know, you can be dyslexic and dysgraphic, or dyslexic and have dyspraxia. And, you know, so they all are interchangeable, but they're all separate entities. So as we kind of wrap up this conversation, dyslexia is an amazing thing. There are so many way cool things about dyslexia that blow my mind. A lot of dyslexic kids are creative. They're the artsy people. Maybe not in a art as in drawing, but it could be acting, it could be dance, it could be all kinds of things. A lot of your actors are dyslexic. They really help a child like kind of hone in on their things that they're good at, and on the things that they don't, which provides these amazing gifts. Homeschooling your dyslexic child can come across as very overwhelming, but not if you break it down into two main categories, which is what are my child's area of dyslexic tendencies, and what is their learning style. You focus on those two things as you are teaching your child, then things are going to just start exploding and making massive progress. So this video, as long as it has been, I want to apologize again. This is something I am super passionate about, and I could talk for hours about. If you've watched this till the end, you are my hero. So I hope I've kind of helped explain dyslexia, how it relates to homeschool and its siblings a little bit for you. If not, please ask me some questions. Let me find the answers in a more logical sense for you, and I'll be glad to help walk you through dyslexia as it relates to homeschooling. So as always, welcome to my crazy, and I'll see you next time.